Okay, so today is Tuesday, July 14th. We're going to be covering the conception vessel. So first, I just want to mention something briefly, especially in terms of like modern cultural conversations. Um, you know, the Ren Mai is one of the eight extraordinary vessels, and I don't want to get so much into the nature of the eight extraordinary vessels, the Qijing Ba Mai, right now, because that is a much deeper conversation and a much more extensive conversation. You're going to get into that in a later course, most likely in the seventh trimester in advanced treatment planning, as well as some other courses here and there. So, because the eight extraordinary vessels is based on Chinese medicine and Chinese philosophy, particularly from a Taoist perspective. There is some Confucian attitudes that have come in, later on. Most of what I learned about the eight extraordinary vessels came from Jeffrey Yuen, who's, if you don't know him, he's a Taoist priest, Taoist master. So I just want to be clear that when I'm talking about the Ren Mai conception vessel, Du Mai governor vessel, I don't want it to be a sociological or political discussion based on modern interpretations and attitudes about gender identification, and gender equality. I just really encourage you to embrace this as a learning opportunity and consider, how these concepts relate to you and your patients in practice. And as always, the best thing is always what achieves results. That's always what's best. So the reason why I mention it, for some of you may not be familiar with the eight extraordinary vessels, there's a lot about how to treat it based on one's gender and how you would incorporate them into practice based on one's gender, right? And so obviously, gender in the last, I would say 10 to 15 years is becoming more and more of a fluid concept. And that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is the movements of predominance, the movements of yin and yang, and the predominance of yin and yang forces, okay? So I really want you to just look at it from that standpoint. So occasionally when you're hearing about the eight extraordinary vessels, I don't want you to confuse that with modern sociological concepts and political concepts. It's not meant to be a sociological or political statement when I'm talking about conception vessel or governing vessel, in terms of like the yin aspects and the yang aspects. I don't presume that like all women are like the epitome of yin and that they don't have any yang. And I'm not presuming that all men are the epitome of yang and don't have any yin. We're all a balance of two, and the balance needs to be predominantly equal. And from a chromosomal perspective, now there are very, very few exceptions. There are, of course, very few exceptions, because nothing in the universe is, just one way or the other way. But there is a predominance of two X chromosomes and an X and a Y chromosome. So let's just leave it at that. So probably some of you are going like, why are you even talking about this? It's like not even an issue. But I'm just putting it out there in the beginning. So if at some point we're talking about CBGV in either in this course or in other courses, that you understand the perspective that this is coming from, which is an ancient Taoist perspective, looking at the energetic nature and the energetic functions of the human being, right? Which is a balance of yin and yang. Okay. So looking at the conception vessel, Ren Mai, I think the character, probably more than the characters of the other officials, is really interesting to me. And for one thing, it's not an official, right? Like unlike the 12 officials, unlike the 12 Zong Fu, which represent kind of like a sub-personality within each of our personalities, right? You've got these sort of like 12 brains, you've got these 12 minds, and each of them has an intelligence and a will and a spirit and desires and functions, right? They all have aspects of body, mind, spirit. And CV and GV certainly do have effects on the body, mind, spirit, but they're more primal than like what I would consider the 12 officials, right? They're like the oceans that feed the rivers of the 12 officials. So the character is very interesting to me. The character on the left side shows a picture of a human being, ostensibly a man, because that's how things were written back then. And then the right side shows a bamboo pole with a load hanging from each end. So in a way, it's like a man or a human being carrying like a load on a pole that's weighted at each end. And you've probably seen pictures of this. Like I remember seeing some pictures of uh, more traditional cultures where they didn't have a lot. They couldn't afford a truck, so they're not going to be riding a unicycle with this with this pole, with all their stuff hanging. But they may be carrying water, or they may be carrying baskets of grain or something else, and they've balanced it at the end of a pole that they're carrying sort of like over their shoulders, over their neck, right? And so this implies that perhaps just being a human being itself is a bit of a burden, right? You've got to take care of this spacesuit, right? So we have to be able to take charge and cope at each level of human life, right? There's an aspect of it that implies endurance, to withstand something, to also some ancient interpretations talk about like the ability to resist an attack, right? The ability to be able to withstand is softened by the notion of following a natural way, right? Which implies balance, right? If you're unbalanced one way or the other, right? Whether that's too much yin or too much yang, or too much external focus or too much internal focus, right? Too much receiving, not enough giving, and vice versa, right? Too hot, too cold, you know, then we get sick, right? That we can't resist attack. We can't resist the external pathogenic factors, whether they are wind and cold and heat, or somebody being a jerk or cutting you off on the highway, right? So the way you're able to withstand, the best way to bear this burden of our own humanity and the care and feeding of this spacesuit is to following the natural way. And they talk about that. This is actually more Confucian than Taoist, which is coping not by confrontation, but by allowing. And if you think about the nature of Ren Mai and CV, right, it's relatively more yin. And so things that are relatively more yin are about reception, right? It's allowing something to kind of come in or towards us, right? Again, towards the center, right? Yang moves away from the center, right? Just think about like tonification and sedation, right? So, right. So we're allowing, we're receiving, right? We're taking something in, we're holding it, we're processing it, right? We're bearing it, because there's so much in life. I mean, how much in your daily life do you just have to just deal with that you just don't have power over or control? The weather, to some degree, the political situation, the overriding themes of the culture. I mean, there's so many things that we don't have control over. The traffic, how your car operates. I mean, there's just so much out of our control. We just have to bear it. And if you're constantly in confrontation with that, if you're in constant opposition to that, you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to deplete all of the yin resources that go towards nourishing what allows us to be young and active in the world. Okay? So this is really about how well do you receive life from the moment you're born, maybe even before you're born, because the 8 extraordinary vessels, especially 4 of them, the CV, the GV, the Chong Mai, and the Dai Mai, are particularly important in terms of like setting and establishing the stage for who we are going to be in the world once we're born. Okay, so there's another way of interpreting the character, right? Which is the person standing upright on their 2 legs, holding a bamboo pole, balancing a weight on each side. So this image also invokes, again, like the concept of balance, right? So maintaining harmony, right? Maintaining balance in your life between the yin and yang forces. It's interesting to me that even though the CV meridian comes up, the anterior median line, right? And the GV comes up the posterior median line. It's interesting that GV also runs deep inside the anterior median line, and there's a branch of the CV that runs up the interior of the posterior median line. So on the outside of the front, you've got CV, but on the inside of the front, you've got a branch of GV. On the outside of the back, you've got GV, but on the inside of the back, you've got CV, right? And so I think that that's really fascinating. And I think everything is sort of like a clue about how best to orient and live our lives, right? So see what it's like to and again, it's balanced by GV, because it's not about allowing everything to happen. Like, we can't be completely 100% passive. We do have to take action, right? So if something is not right, if something is not in alignment with the heaven and earth as it manifests in you, then you have to take action. And that might be rising up and confronting something, right? Like confront, like with, con means with, front is face, right? So you have to actually, like, you might have to get in the face of life, either a person or an organization or a situation, to confront that. And that requires the resources that CV provides, as well as the ability to take action and stand up and be a powerful force in the world, which is moderated by GV. So they have to work together. All right. Any questions about that? Okay, very good. All right, so let's, let me just double check where I'm at here. Ah, yes, okay. So something I wanted to mention briefly about the channel is there's a way of like looking at the channel and the points in terms of certain sections, and I've kind of divided it up myself arbitrarily into like 4 sections. So CV1 through 8, and this is in page 4 of the notes that I've put on Canvas. CV1 through 8 has a lot to do with deep, primordial aspects of nourishment and power, right? Because we think of power as kind of a yang thing. But power is not just yang. I would say the expression of power in a directed way is relatively more yang. But power in and of itself comes from something that's able to arise. And I think this is actually something that gets short shrift in our culture right now, which is I think is relatively more feminine, relatively more yin quality, which is like the observing and allowing of things to arise, right? So, you know, we're often very impatient, and as a culture, you know, I watch the news, we're very impatient and very unforgiving and very like unintrospective about what's trying to move and arise when something is moving in society, when something is moving in ourselves. And we ourselves often will judge, you know, very well or very harshly from a superficial standpoint, certain tendencies that we have, but we don't really look and see, well, what's motivating that? What's trying to arise? So like if I have a certain tendency maybe to be impatient and to like rush to judgment, or like, you know, I quickly speak without thinking, and I just kind of like put my foot in my mouth and I walk around in kind of a near state, you know, experience of embarrassment, or like, you know, I think everyone around me is a moron. Why aren't they listening to me? You know, you don't have any patience. Like, what's that? Don't suffer fools gladly, right? If you have some kind of tendency, you know, you can look at the tendency, which is the yang expression of it, or you could also look at, well, what's that first movement of chi that's arising from my depths, right? And there's a definite power to that, which is why it's very hard to change our habitual patterns. Has anyone ever like found like changing your maybe like quote unquote negative habitual behavior patterns to be really simple? Like, oh, I'm aware of it and poof, now I'm, yeah, sure. The next day it's, yeah, think of the past, right? Anybody experience that? Not one person? There's a reason. It's because it's attached to us. It's just like the crappy flower that's rooted in the soil of our being between CV1 and 8. You can just snip the flower, but guess what? Another flower blooms. Oh yeah, there I go again, right? So it's really about looking at what's there, and there's a power behind that, and there's something trying to arise. So um, this is really important to deal with. And again, CV1 through 8 also has to do with the lower orifices. So what do the lower orifices deal with, right? Letting go of waste, right? So this is about like on one hand, you've got the yang within the yin, that something is arising, this powerful force of chi and blood that's arising from your depths, both literally and figuratively, as well as this is where everything that no longer serves is gotten rid of, just about, except through sweating and vomiting and spitting, right? But all of that is like, that's the very thin fluids, right? Except for the vomiting part. But still, that's already from within. So, that really doesn't quite count. But the things about, like, the fluids of the upper body are very different than the fluids of the lower body, right? So this has a lot to do with the deep resources that allow us to bear the suffering and the pain and the joys and the ups and downs of life, right? And allows us to like let go of things, right? But it's also the area where our power is rooted. So if you look at your negative behavior patterns, ask yourself, like, meditate on, well, what's trying to arise? Like, it's coming out this way because this is like the best my mind or my conditioned mind can come up with. But underneath of that, like, what's stirring in there? What's trying to move? What's desiring expression, right? And you can look at that also by virtue of like, what's important to you? What is your values in this moment? What is the experience that you want to have or to offer others, right? So most of the lower Dantian CV points are said to tonify the yang qi, and also where the jin-ye body fluids and wei defensive qi are extracted from what's called the impure, which I don't like that term. I like the turbid, which is like the thicker fluids, right? So this is the origins of our most fundamental energetic protection, right? So this is an area that really has to be cared for very deeply, especially in women, right? Because at times during your cycle, when you're menstruating, you can be a little bit more vulnerable to invasion of cold and damp. Okay, all right. So this is like the lower drainage ditch, right? The lower jiao is considered like the ditch, right? Or the sluice ditch or the drainage ditch, right? This is where the power is fostered and begins to move, as well as letting go of what no longer serves, both physically and on other levels. CV9 through 15, all right, this is more the middle jiao. This is like what you would consider to be like our seat of understanding and processing, right? So this is like where your body starts to the digestion process in a real deep way, because it's inside of you. It's not just in your mouth and the saliva is working on it, because you can easily spit it out. But once you swallow it, like it's at a whole other depth, right? It's now it's now in your internal organs. It's now internal, right? So that's in the interior, right? So in Chinese medicine, the exterior is everything outside the organ systems, including your bones. The bones are the most yin of the yang, right? But your internal organs, that's the yin. So now it's inside of you. So in a way, your body starts, in a way, like thinking about what this stuff is and what to do with it, right? Similarly, we eat our life. So as the information comes in, experiences come in, we process them, we try to integrate them. But are we integrating them in a way that's based on our conditioned mind, which is not necessarily bad, but if it's just at the level of conditioning, we're not fully present. So it's not connected to the heart mind. It's not connected to the part of us that's like non-reactive. We're just, we don't want to just react to everything that comes towards us, right? I mean, that's what little kids do, right? You now have the capacity to ponder, and this is what the earth allows us to do. This is what CV allows us to do. It allows us to slow down, to ponder, to consider, right? To investigate from various perspectives, right? Gallbladder, liver, also in the middle jiao, right? But then CV 16 through 21, in the upper jiao, this is more the seat of knowing, right? This is the heart, lungs, which really supports our capacity for intuition, especially when it's combined with the energy of the kidney that's rising up into the upper kidney points, right? where this is beyond where the kidney primary channel has ended at kidney 22, right? You can consider these like sort of like these extra points on the kidney. So that's infusing this area with Jing, excuse me. And so when the heart and the kidneys are in communication and in harmony with the lungs, right, to balance spontaneity with routine and reverence, then we get a sense of intuition. That's where our knowing comes from, right? And then CV22, like through 24, right, in the upper head, right, 22, 20, was it 22, 23, 24, right? This is like as it's moving to the head and now joining GV in the internal aspects of the body, this is now what's considered like the seat of our illumination, right? Reintegration. You've climbed the mountaintop, you've received the wisdom, you've received the revelations, right? But now you got to climb back down and go back to mundane life. In Buddhism, this would be known as a bodhisattva, somebody who's achieved enlightenment, but they've decided to come back to Earth, to another reincarnation, to help the rest of us schmoes. So just a brief bit on point selection. So how do you select the points? Well, again, some of you are going to have very different ways of connecting to your patient. So for me, I connect very kinesthetically and intuitively to my patient. And actually, I think my intuition is kind of kinesthetically based. So for some of you, palpation, feeling along the different points of the channel to differentiate, maybe, well, do I do CV5 or CV7? Do I do CV9 or CV10? Right? So some of you, like a lot of these points have very similar functions, especially when they're close in proximity. So how do you decide, which points to do? Palpation is whether or not you actually get much information from palpation. I highly recommend palpating those points, even if you have no idea like what you're doing or what you're getting. Just let yourself kind of open, be receptive, just feel what you feel, because here's the thing. At a certain point, you palpate like 1,000 patients, something is going to kind of click in, and all of a sudden something is going to open for you. It's like pulses. Maybe some of you are already now at this point where, don't you feel someone's pulses and all of a sudden like, oh, like you kind of get something. Like it's not just an intellectual understanding, it's like you get it in yourself. You ever experience that? Doesn't look like anybody does. Okay, well, it'll happen. It'll happen.
We haven't taken pulses in like, I don't know how long it's been.
Right, that's right. Yeah. Because, yeah, right, because you're not allowed to touch people. Yeah. All right, well, how do we bear this, right? How do we bear this situation, right? How do we experience balance while we're bearing this situation, right? Like, where do we go? Like, where does my habitual mind go? Where does my energy generally go? Like, right? Or, maybe your reaction is to just put on a good face, right? And just, it'll be fine, right? Which may be equally ungrounded, right? I mean, optimism is nice, and pessimism certainly has its benefits and value, but is it grounded in your authentic reality? Like, you have to really look at, and part of that is actually by design, because we have a will. Like, you actually have a choice about how you bear what you must bear. Like, that's the only thing that like no one can take from you. It doesn't matter whether you're in prison. It doesn't matter whether you're like unemployed. It doesn't matter whether you're making like 7-8 figures a year. The one thing that every adult has in common is you have the capacity to choose how you're going to bear what you must bear. And that is your choice. And that is your choice. Once you're aware of the choice, then you have the obligation to choose, which is why when we don't choose, it's so bloody painful, right? Because we are aware that we're not choosing. We're aware that we're in resignation. And that's a collapse of yang and a preponderance of yin. And then all of a sudden now you're setting stage for excessive dampness, which becomes a vicious cycle. This is why physical activity is so important. right? This is why meditation is so important. This is on one side of the pole, you've got meditation. On the other side of the pole, you've got exercise. And whatever kind that you want to work for you, whether it's yoga or whatever, primal scream therapy, I don't care, right? You gotta have something of each, right? All right. So point selection. Where did my notes go? Yeah, so either by palpation, which I highly recommend, or considering the functions in terms of the officials that the point affects. So by palpation, looking at which officials are affected by this point and their correspondences, especially the substances, because substances, with the exception of like qi and shen, are relatively yin in nature, right? Blood, Jin-Ye, Jing, right? These are relatively more dense substances. So these are going to be substances that, depending on which jiao the point is going to affect, is going to be strongly affected by CV points. And then the upper points, to some degree, are very effective for more of the qi. There are a few exceptions, of course, and we'll get into those, like CV6, for example. So looking at the different substances it affects. So there's palpation, which official is this affecting, right? And their correspondences, and what substances does this point deal with? And then also looking at what level it's on and what are the other points that are in its neighborhood that are at that latitude, like on kidney, stomach, and spleen, and maybe even liver and gallbladder in some areas. So this is going to give you a lot of insight as to the nature of what goes on in this neighborhood, right? All right, any questions about that? And then we'll go over the summary of functions. Okay, all right. So briefly looking at the summary of functions. So on a body level, it's considered to be the sea of yin. So what does that mean? It means that there's a lot of the yin aspects of life and our function that are governed or supported or assisted by the conception vessel. It's the commander and controller of all the yin functions of the body, right? So think about what these are. These are like nourishing, supporting, moistening, lubricating, what else? Containing, insulating, right? So these are all the things that, like, the oil in your car that prevent too much friction, which creates heat, right? And that, if that heat or yang becomes excessive, then, body structures, body substances begin to deteriorate. They're affected. It's heat is very destructive organically as well. Okay. And as well as emotionally unstabilizing, right? Because heat can, what's that called? Engender wind, right? Which can be disorienting and create dizziness and madness and mania and anxiety, right? So this has a lot to do with supporting the fluids, the yin fluids of life, right? And the containment of these fluids, making sure that they're held. And this way, it's very much like the spleen. It's like keeping the fluids where they're supposed to be, and then sort of like in the quality of the liver, in the timing of when they should be there, right? So the spleen maintains the integrity to keep the fluids in the place where they should be, right? To keep them in the right place, to store them and hold them, right? And then the liver helps to maintain that everything, these things are stored in the right place at the right time, okay? So all of these fluids, especially the blood, are very important in terms of the nature and the health of our shen. So the less fluids you have, the less blood you have, the more unrooted your shen and qi become. And then the qi can start to move exuberantly, either in the right direction too intensely or in the wrong direction, or the shen can become disturbed and unrooted, right? Insomnia, mania, palpitations, anxiety, things like that, okay? It also helps to support the creation and maintenance of all these fluids as well. So that's very vital, right? It's said to regulate the essence chamber. I don't want to get like too much into that. I think this might some people think it refers to the uterus. Some people think it refers to the ovaries. I think it's more about the ovaries because the ovaries have such a profound effect, uterus too, but the ovaries have such a profound effect on the hormones and the hormonal releases that regulate yin and yang, right? Via their system of like reaction response, right? And then it's said to regulate the blood chamber. And then most people think this is what relates to the uterus, that the uterus is the blood chamber, because this is obviously where the menstrual blood comes from as the uterine lining is sloughs off, right? So this refers to the maintenance and control over the uterus and all uterine functions, right? So it works very closely with the spleen and the liver. Which is not surprising that these lower CV points that have such a profound effect on the uterus and menstruation also are, interestingly enough, meeting points with the spleen and the liver channels. Okay, it's also said to regulate and maintain the fluid chamber, which is the bladder, which encloses or holds the urine prior to its release. Right. So it also regulates the the functions of all the three jiao. Again, the lower jiao is kind of like this sluice ditch, the way they interpret it. It's like this sort of culvert or ditch, right? It's sort of like a sewer, right? And then the middle jiao, I love this translation. Some people call it a maceration chamber. What a great word. I actually have a macerating juicer, which is interesting. It doesn't have like that lawnmower engine that goes, like 1,000 RPMs, which gets like really hot. This thing like grinds the vegetable material and then extracts like the juice and then sends the pulp, this way and the fiber that way. And that's very much like what our teeth do, right? This maceration chamber. That's like this, it's like there's this sort of like breaking down, almost like a chewing without teeth. Think about like a gizzard, right? But I actually like, while there is that like aspect of function, I really like the image of the middle jiao as more like a cauldron, like a soup cauldron or a stew cauldron, right? Where things like fluid and food material, right? Like, liquids and solids are coming together and merging into like one thing, right? And that's sort of like what describes what happens more in your stomach, right? Because your stomach, it does rumble and move around, but it's not really macerating anything. Like I mean, your teeth are what macerates. So that's that. All right, Tell. All right. So then the upper jiao is more like a mist, right? We don't want thick fluids in your lungs and your throat, right? Right? Like I get that myself, right? I get easily dry and a lot of mucus in my throat. So like I have to clear this throat. We don't want that. That's pathological. That shouldn't be there like that. It should be a thin fluid. Like you don't want thick fluids in your lungs, right? You want thin fluids in your lungs, in your sinuses, in your eyes, right? You don't want thick fluids in your eyes. Anybody ever like wake up and you got like all that like eye gerb? Yeah, like I had this one patient, when she first came to see me, she was like 17, 18. She was a really outstanding, she was like, national level field hockey player. Came to see me for knee pain, but upon conversation, I discovered that when she wakes up in the morning, like her eyes are actually like sealed shut. She literally has to like go into the bathroom, like find her way into the bathroom, get a hot washcloth, which she set out already ahead of time because she didn't have to look for it, and like run hot water and put like a hot compress over her eyes to kind of like melt this crust. I mean, that's messed up, right? So that's a thick fluid where it should not be, right? So, consequently, we looked at CV, we looked at damp and other things, right? All right. So that's that. That's the body level, right? Also, I'm sorry, one last thing. It gives us the capacity to control our orifices, which is kind of important, right? So, in the beginning of our life, we learn to control our bowel sphincter, our anal sphincter, right? Potty training, we learn to like hold our urine until we're in a place where we can let it go. Like if it's 3 a.m, the parking lot behind the 7-Eleven, right? No, wait, that's not right. Right. So, you have to, I'm sorry, sometimes I just say things just to see if like actually anyone's actually paying attention or not just like looking at Facebook. All right. But the ability to control our mouth, the anus, the urethra, that's controlled by CV. Right? So the mind is, so it has a powerful effect on the mind. This is also called the vessel of bonding. So the CV in the baby is said to be activated when the baby, firstborn, is laying down on the chest of the mother or the parent, right? So as you lay your baby, chest to chest onto you, right, as a parent, that is said to activate the external aspects of the Ren Mai for that baby. When the parent is holding the baby, letting the child rest right on their chest. So this is said to be the level, the vessel of bonding. So this activates upon bonding with one's parent or mother, and this is based on Taoist philosophy, right? So this enables us to navigate the dynamic balance between dependence and independence, right? So between bonding and self-containment, self-possession, right? Um, it helps us to feel satisfied, satiated, content, right? A difficulty in bonding in life. Now, again, every CF has their sort of, quality and quantity of bonding. We sometimes think of like metal CFs as aloof and not really needing connection, but that's actually not true. They just don't want any connection, right? They don't want 7-Eleven connection. They want like Tiffany's connection. You know what I mean? Like they don't want like, Dollar General connection, right? They want they want like, Lord and Taylor connection. You see what I'm saying? They don't want Yugo connection. They want like Mercedes, Aston Martin connection, right? So that bonding is very important. Like they don't want to just like be friends with just anybody. They want to be friends with like the people that deserve their friendship, right? Some of you are smiling because you know what I'm talking about. Right? So just the fact that like the 99% of people don't rate doesn't mean that bonding and connection isn't important to you, right? Similarly, like there's some CFs that like they want to bond with everybody, right? And then it's just like, well, then over time we'll figure out who's fun and who's a drag, and then we'll just weed them out of our life. It's a slow, painful process, but it does occur. All right. So, inadequately nourished or inadequately protected by the parent at a young age can impact the development of the CV, which can be corrected with treatment, with introspection, with personal changes. You can kind of make up for what you didn't get as a child. If you are open to letting go of the past. And similarly, like some people have trouble feeling contained or content or complete, right? So any of the substances may leak out, incontinence, discharges, things like that. So that's an insufficiency. That's like a deficiency in the Ren Mai energetic, right? Similarly, if there's like an excess of bonding, that can create a stagnation in Ren Mai, whereas people are showing up or manifesting as overly dependent, overly needy, like inability to feel full or satiated on a physical level or a psycho-emotional level. And you may notice in them an excess development of mucus or phlegm. In the lower jowl, you might see a lot of fibroids. Now, I'm not saying all fibroids are because of this. I'm not like, if any of you experience like fibroids or cysts, uterine, ovarian, that does not mean necessarily that like your Ren Mai is stagnating and you got an excess of bonding and maybe you had a smothering parent. I'm saying that's a possibility to consider. Okay, I'm not making an is statement, right? But stasis of phlegm, stasis of damp, right? People who are like never feel full, never feel satisfied. This can indicate an excess. Sorry, like like feeling overly full. Excuse me, overly full. Sorry, like the never full. That's more of a deficiency. Sorry. So these are people like you eat like like half a sandwich and you're like, oh my God, like I'm so overfull, right? That's more of an excess of Ren Mai, forgive me, all right? On a mental emotional level, this also has a lot to do with our experience of our form, how we relate to our form, how we relate to our body, how we relate to our gender, how we relate to our culture, how we relate to our family, right? This is about group consciousness. This is about how we identify with any particular group. Now, the interesting thing to me is as you get older, like once you're over like 25 or so, or once you've been kind of like living outside of your parents' house for a few, maybe 5 years or so, you're going to realize and become more aware of your individual um, personality traits, like your idiosyncrasies. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, like idiosyncrasy is bad or weird. I'm not talking about all the like weird things. I'm talking about like just your individual nature. You have, you know, like once you start to spend a lot more time with yourself, depending on yourself, like you realize you have certain preferences, you have certain ways of doing things, certain like I like this, I don't like that, I'm this way, I'm not that way, right? And then eventually you realize that there's like people that are kind of similar to you, but at some point you realize you're really unique, you know? So in terms of like a sociological experiment, you're an N of one, right? Which means is like, you know, in this sort of like group experiment of humanity, like there's really only you. And while you may share similarities with other people, you know, especially if you have like a close beloved or partner in life, whether it's romantic or platonic, they're really you, like you really are quite unique. And so there's the potential for people who are very Ren deficient to compare themselves to others, as well as certain CFs as well. But we all do that. We all have to compare ourselves because you know you because in a way like they either kind of are the warning like, oh yeah, like don't be like that, or they might inspire you like, wow, you know, I really appreciate what they have. Like, how do I develop that in myself? Like, how do I get more of that? But you also have to say, like, you know, because if you compare yourself like to maybe like somebody famous or a celebrity, maybe they get a lot of money, or maybe they have things in their life that you like, or personality traits. You know, like I remember this psychologist talking about how this one of his patients was very like harshly judgmental of himself, and he was always very self-critical. And it started in college, and his roommate was Elon Musk. And he's comparing him, and he was actually like a student who did very well, but he was comparing himself to Elon Musk. Well, you know, I mean, like, not many of us are going to really compare well intellectually to, I mean, maybe in terms of his personality and like, you know, how his behavior is, but like in terms of like intellect, like raw intellect, like not many of us like are at that level. So the key is like you want to compare yourself to, because like you also can't compare yourself to people like that because his personal life might be like a complete and utter mess and disaster, right? And like, do you want that, right? So when you're developing, and this is like an eight extraordinary vessel conversation, when you're developing in terms of like the CV and GV, like who you are, the nature of your being, the raw material of who you are, CV, and how you manifest that out in the world, GV, the best thing to compare yourself to is who you were in the past. Compare yourself to last month. Compare yourself to last year. Compare yourself to 2 years ago. Compare yourself to 5 years ago. Compare yourself to 10 years ago, right? That's the way to integrate your past, especially if it's been painful or you feel you didn't get what you needed. You know, maybe you didn't get the parents that you would have liked. Maybe you didn't get like the family you would have liked, or maybe you were born into poverty, or maybe you were born into wealth and you hated that. I mean, you know, whatever it is, you know, maybe there's a lot of criminals in your family, and, you know, like, or maybe there's a lot of mental illness in your family. or both. Whatever that is like you have to at some point say, you know what, I am so unique, I really can't compare myself to anyone else. I can be inspired by or learn from others, but in essence, like the CBGV balance, that balance is created by because these moderate our development through the stages of our life. So an important thing is to look at is like, okay, how do I compare this stage of my life to this previous stage of my life? That is how you move forward and not drive yourself crazy. All right. And so on that note, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10 o'clock. Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't think I actually explicitly stated the spirit level aspects of this, but I alluded to it in the end of the last part of the conversation, which is the conception vessel really helps us to understand and to give us the materials that we need to deeply know who we are. And part of who we are is just out of our control, the nature we were born with. And just in the process of our development, certain things become more important to us, certain things are just more interesting to us, and that's just the way it is. Like you don't wake up and say, hey, I think today my favorite color is going to be green. I mean, it just like the color, these things that like just deeply resonate with you at a deep level of your being. And as we develop, we start to separate from the people that raised us in terms of our individuation, right? Learning to feel complete in ourselves. Like, it's nice to have uh, another generation, like an older generation, to like go to and lean on and rely on from time to time. It's nice to have a partner. I mean, I love my partner, right? But like at some point we have to kind of like stand or be with ourselves and feel complete with that. And it's not always feeling satisfied, but it's like saying, but at some point you just have to say, like, this is what I've got, how do I make the best of it, right? um, and then can you, again, thinking about the blood and the Shen, can you be open to receiving love and loving yourself for who you are, which is a work in process, a work in progress. And then this, because this is the mediumship of our expression, right? Like this, that body you have, whether you like it or not, is the exact body you need to do what you need to do in the world, right? So can you receive yourself to yourself, right? Can are you willing to receive the way you are and bow to that and receive it as a gift? Because it is, a gift, and one day it will be taken from us. So it also helps to like navigate our relationship with our inner and outer environment. Okay, so let's start with CV1. J.R. Worsley said that this was a first aid point for drowning. I'm hoping that if any of you are like me and go to the beach a lot, that if you encounter somebody who is being pulled out of the water after nearly drowning, I'm hoping that you don't walk up to them and say, excuse me, I'm an acupuncturist, and shove your thumb in their perineum. That would be a bad idea. It would certainly get you known. So if your goal is to be famous, that will work. So this is said to be a first aid point for resuscitation for drowning. I would really recommend you not needle people who are unconscious, who are not breathing. If that happens, I'd rather you call 911 and let the paramedics deal with it and just give them CPR. But if you think about the nature of it, in terms of its nourishing capacity, it's nourishing the yin aspects, the blood, the fluids of the blood, right? The part of the blood that allows it to be able to move and fluid and to be transported to other places, right? It benefits the essence, it benefits the jing, and it's also said to some degree to tonify the kidneys in combination with other points. And I would say this is really good for all like the juicy stuff, that some people may be extremely deficient in. They're very dry, they're very hot, they're very young, they're very unrooted. They kind of like their attention floats up and out. They may be struggling with fertility, right? And there's different aspects of people who struggle with fertility. There's people who just are lacking the raw materials to be fertile. And there's some people whose minds are so young that it interferes with reception, because it's so much about like doing and being and going out and extending and over depleting themselves, like overworking. This would be like, and I'm generalizing because I've had so many patients that fit this picture, which is like you've got the 41-year-old woman who is working 60 hours a week, who is like maybe the primary breadwinner in their family, that also kind of like has a very high standard of how things should be in their life. So they don't receive a lot of help and support. So they like things done a certain way. So they do everything around the house. And, they do all the shopping because, my partner just can't get the right type of mayonnaise I like. And, and then they're very highly productive, highly intelligent, like highly effective in the world, like very accomplished, right? So they're a victim of their own success. So they're like overworked, and then they have a kind of job that like puts a lot of pressure on them. I'm thinking of like one in particular who's like this very sort of high level attorney, corporate attorney, um, for Northrop Grumman, and and then like, okay, now I want to have kids. And so they go out and they buy like $10,000 worth of prenatal vitamins, and they've got the app on their phone, for meditation and stuff like that. But here's their meditating, right? I mean, so it's like meditation of an outboard motor, and so it's like I'm having a hard time getting pregnant. So there's not a lot of yin like in their life. This is not a value judgment. This is an observation. This is a clinical assessment. This is not a value judgment. So consequently, they might also have a lot of vaginal dryness, maybe even like a lot of signs of kidney deficiency. This is a phenomenal point to needle. And when you needle this, needle it about 8 to 10 fen. Yeah, ADHD, CV1 can be good for that, right? So like it helps to calm the Shen by giving you the juicy fluids that help root the Shen. Think about the Shen as like the gas that's dissolved inside of a thick fluid, right? Right. The gas, when it's just floating around in the atmosphere, like it just goes everywhere. But if you can infuse that gas, you can root it into like some substrate, right? It contains it, it roots it. So this is very nice for people with vaginitis. On the physical level, it's a phenomenal point, phenomenal point. Vaginitis, any kind of itis in the lower jiao, right? It supports the fluid creation, which cools things off. Also, it's the beginning of the upraising of and the holding of things. So inability to retain urine, as well as on the excessive side, like difficult urination, like it's hard to like let go of the flow. Nocturnal emissions, vaginal discharges. If you think about like also the Shen being unrooted and kind of like not contained, it's kind of flying out. So people with like super busy minds, hard to fall asleep, like hot at night, they're just kind of like manic and just irritated and pissed, and they're just so dry and hot. They don't have any yin and cool, right? So this is a really nice point for people like that. And I highly recommend, like once we eventually get back to treating people in the clinic, come up with some really decent reason that you can kind of like con your supervisor into letting you do CV1. Because if you can do it in the clinic with support, and also like student clinic patients tend to be a little bit more receptive, a little bit more forgiving of like the kind of the messiness of like your presentation and things like that. Really highly encourage it. But yeah, maybe things like ADHD, I've never thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. Things are very scattered, right? Things are very like unfocused. So this helps to root, right? And this is a nice point to treat. And then like while you're getting the chi, which is way in there, I mean, it's like 8 to 10 fen, like, so don't be shy. You got to use an 1.5 inch, 2 inch needle, even on somebody very thin. Not 3 inch, Carol, not 3 inch. Yeah, like 2 inch, 1.5 inch, that's plenty. um, yeah. So but you want to get the chi, and it's this incredible sensation of chi in that. It's not bad. I don't know, has anyone here ever had the point needle? Nobody? Really? Among all of you, no one has had this point treated? Oh, you have. Oh, Sally's waving. Okay, got it. Sorry, I can't see everybody all the time. All right, good. Yeah, it's a phenomenal point, and it's not a point you're gonna have to wonder if you got the chi or not. You'll know. You'll know. All right. So CV2, crooked bone. Yes. Somebody had something to say. Did somebody jump in? No.
It was me. I was unmuted, but I was just laughing.
Yes. Yes. It's a great point. Yeah. Did you like it, Sally, when you got it?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I actually had a CBGB blog done. So, yeah, I think, more nervous about it than I needed to be. I mean, they were very professional about it, and actually it was a very powerful treatment for me. Very,
Yeah.
very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, it can be life-changing for some people, and not just for women, for men too. All right. Okay. So CV2, Q2, which is crooked bone or curved bone. That's referring to obviously the pubic symphysis, the superior aspect of the pubic symphysis. I don't do this point a whole lot. I generally do this point when I am treating the one or more of the 3 leg yin sinew meridians, one of the 3 yin leg sinew meridians. So either the kidney, liver, or the spleen sinew channels. This is said to be the area between CV2 and 3, is said to be the area that it represents what's called the gathering point of the 3 leg yin sinews. So the sinew channels are like this zone or field of chi that circulates above the primary channel. It doesn't flow so much as circulates. It includes the wei chi and the chi just below the surface of the skin, in the space between the skin and the fascia, and the superficial aspects of the muscles. Sometimes they're called the tendinomuscular channels or meridians. Sometimes they're called the muscular meridians. So it's all the same thing. Sinew, tendinomuscular, muscle meridians. They're also referred as one of the collaterals, right? So these are all channels that help us to move and to be active, right? As well as to protect us in terms of our wei qi. And so this is a major point to allow wei qi to move jing into the spine. So if somebody is very weak, has experienced a lot of muscle atrophy, maybe after a long illness, you can moxa this point, you can needle this point. This is also a very deep point, 1/2 to 1 inch deep. Obviously, you want to be very careful with pregnant women. I wouldn't do it beyond like the first trimester. It's a nice point to moxa. You may need to get some water and wet it, either with a gloved hand or a finger cut, to mat down any of the pubic hair in the area, and then put some little bit of chapstick down if you want to moxa. It's very helpful. But this is a great point to regulate the chi of the lower jiao. Any kind of chi issue for the lower jiao, especially in terms of like cold accumulating in the low jiao, which you'll feel because when you palpate the low jiao, it feels cold. People report cold. Things are worse in the cold. The signs and symptoms point to cold. The pulse is slow. The pulse is deep. So I mean, you guys know the signs and symptoms of cold, right? So if at any point you want to go over that, I'm happy to go over it during a break or whatever, right? But this is affecting the genitals, affecting the bladder, affecting the uterus. So like fixed, sharp pain, like crampy pains, but they're more sharp and fixed. At the beginning of the period, that could be blood stagnation due to cold, which you would then confirm with a slow, deep pulse, maybe feelings of cold in the area when you put your hand down there, right? Also some people say, oh, I feel so much better when I put like a hot water bottle or a heating pad. There you go, right? So also urinary problems due to dribbling, right? This is also a good point for containing the blood. Not the best. CV4 is better. We'll get to that. But some people combine 2 and 4. So this is a nice way to use this point. And again, like most of the points in this area, it's a meeting point of the kidney, liver, and spleen. CV3, another nice point. Not a point I do like super frequently. It's a front move point of the bladder. Most TCM practitioners do not needle the front move points. They really use them upon palpation to check to see, especially Japanese practitioners or Japanese style practitioners who want to see if there's some kind of chi problem involving the organ system. If it's very chi deficient, this may be very tender or very flaccid upon palpation or cold. Again, this meets with the spleen, liver, and kidney. Regulates a lot of the bladder functions, more so than 2. Now we start to resolve any kind of damp heat accumulation. So think about urinary tract infection, painful urination, you pee and it's really dark and it kind of burns a little bit, right? CV3 to the rescue. This is a great point for that. Believe it or not, actually moxa on this point can really help with heat in this area, because the moxa is going to stimulate the more yin aspects of the point, which is the fluids and the fluidy plasma aspects of the blood. This is also said to be a major point of Wei Qi. I'm not really sure why, but a lot of books say so. So there you have it. Central pole, the name kind of refers to this curve just above the pubic bone, this like lower dantian. This is like CV3, CV4 area, is the area where a lot of qigong practitioners bring qi or transmit qi and medical qigong from this area, from the lower dantian that's represented by CV3, CV4, right, depending on which different tradition you're in. And this is where your inner self can interact with the outer world, right? So if people have trouble like manifesting things, think about the bladder, right? Managing our resources. People have trouble managing the resources, manifesting things. This could be a nice point to moxa and needle. It's also said to tonify the kidneys for menstruation. That is, there's not enough chi and blood being created. So it'd be like, amenorrhea, or like the menstrual cycle is like the menstrual, I would say there's like too much cold in the uterus, right? Or maybe scanty periods, right? Very light, and you just don't feel complete. Like you just don't feel like things have really like moved out. Not so much with like the regularity of the cycle, right? Okay. This is also really good for any kind of urinary problem, because the urine is one of the ways through urination, it's called disinhibiting. That's the way the body rids itself of heat. And the small intestine will draw heat from the heart down and then send it to the bladder to be excreted. So urination is one of the ways that the body rids itself, like the urinary functions is one of the ways that the body rids heat, especially from like the upper jowl, right? So there might be a lot of pathological heat in the blood, might be a lot of pathological heat in the upper jowl that's disturbing the shen, right? So this can be a really good point for that, adding a lot of these like cooling aspects. Worsley said that CV3 through CV6 also has a lot of control over the endocrine functions. Uterine contractions, ovulation, production of progesterone and testosterone, this balance of estrogen and progesterone can be really these points can be well used and well suited for those imbalances. And again, how do you decide? Palpation, other confirming signs and symptoms. Okay. Again, it's not a point that I do like a whole lot. CV4, first gate. Now, this is a point I do a lot. It's also called gateway to the original chi. This is, for some, considered to be the front move point of the small intestine. So any issue involving the small intestine, you know, certain bowel disorders. I can't think of it offhand. I always have trouble forgetting the name of it. So if you guys remember it, please let me know. But it's it's like IBS, but it's not IBS, and it affects the small intestine. I can never remember the name of it until some patient tells me.
Like
But this,
SIBO?
yes, SIBO. Thank you, thank you. I knew there was going to be somebody smart in here. All right. So smarter than me is what I was meant to say. Yeah, I just have the hardest time remembering that. But CV4, oh my God, this is like one of my desert island points. like I think about, well, when I'm like 80 years old, you know, if I live that long, and you know, my mind is turning to mush, and I can only remember like maybe like a dozen points. I hope this is one of the ones I remember, because this is such a phenomenal point. Not only because it's the small intestine front move point, but really because this is it's like it's like the gateway to the original chi. It fosters all of the best aspects of the yuan chi. So it's really good for chronic problems. You know, because again, you know, things start to affect our wei qi, then they affect the yin qi, and then they affect the yuan qi, right? There's the qi level, there's the blood level, then there's the organ level. And chronic disease almost always affects the organ level at some point, right? You've had something for more than a year, chances are it's now going to have some kind of effect on the yuan level. Depending on how much heat is involved is going to depend on how quickly it moves through these different levels. The more heat, the more quickly it's going to advance to affect the yuan level, the organ level. This is such a phenomenal point to strengthen both the yin and the yang. The yin in terms of like the yuan qi, which is the most yin type of qi, like the yuan qi, the jing qi. So this is great for people who are born with poor constitutions. You know, they have a lot of congenital disorders. This is great for people that are dealing with like a lack of, you know, all of the juicy resources, you know, as well as qi, right? So chronic disease leaves us very depleted. It depletes the yin, it depletes the blood, it depletes the qi. It starts to affect the shen, right? Because anybody who's had to deal with something for a long period of time, you know, after a while, it's like, you know, if it's hard to come to peace with that, it becomes very irritating. Like a lot of times, like people will feel frustrated, not because that's the energetic nature of the illness, but they're just frustrated at dealing with it for so long, right? I happen to treat this one practitioner who, actually, you know what? You guys remember Pete? Remember Pete? Was that you guys? Yeah, that was you guys, right? So huh?
Was he the young guy?
Yes, he was the guy I brought into class in the first trimester. Wasn't that your class?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I just saw him yesterday. He is like a new man. He is a new man. He's been getting therapy from like me and like two other people. And we've just been like loving the bejesus out of this dude. I mean, we're just like throwing the kitchen sink at him. He's getting it like on all levels, body, mind, spirit. He's a new guy. He can eat just about anything. He's now running like, you know, 2 to 3 miles a day. He's tired and he's sore because, you know, we're still working on his leg because, you know, he broke his leg in 3 places. But you know, he can now eat without any problems. He's got energy. He's about to move to Connecticut. So we just had our sort of like physical farewell yesterday. He's moving to his sister's in Connecticut for a few months, and then he's moving to Pittsburgh with a bunch of his friends. He's got a job waiting for him. I mean, he's bright, he's energetic, you know, like, so I think about like CV4, which is a point that I did on him a lot to support his constitution, to support, you know, because like he's been seriously ill since like high school. He's just managed to persevere through force of will through all of this digestive problems, you know, allergic to every food, like IBS, SIBO. Then he got Lyme. Oh my God! Like on top of all of that, like just after like we met, or maybe just before, he got Lyme disease. Like as if this kid didn't have enough, right? Um, I held him in water. I held him in water with fire within. Um, Nicest guy. Like I just read this card. I actually ended up like just weeping reading his card that he wrote me this like long letter in this card. It was like, there's like sort of three of us that just like wouldn't give, because I told him, I was like on this first visit, I was like, I don't know why, but like I'm meditating on you. And like, I get it's going to take a couple years, but you're going to be better. Like, I swear to God, man, like if I had like $100,000 to put on, you know, black, like, okay, you're going to get better. Like, yeah, let's roll the craps wheel or the roulette wheel. Cause I am guaranteed, I'm sure that you're going to get better. Like I'll bet my house on it. And he was just like, I don't know. I'm like, you got to hold on to this, man. I'm telling you, like, I get it. So he did. And the guy, I mean, you remember he like ran 10 miles on a broken leg. Who the hell does that? A water CF does that. That's who. So CV4 was this like moxa. He's like, I'm really hot. I'm like, I know, man, this is going to help. He's like, you keep lighting all this stuff on fire. I'm like, I know, man, trust me, it's going to make you cooler. And sure enough, he would. In the middle of winter, I'd have like the window open. He's like with his shirt off. He's just wearing a pair of shorts. It's like 30 degrees outside. And he's like, oh, can you please open the window? So like, this is so rich and strengthening all of the resources and all the fluids, all of the yin things that we need to manifest the yang things that we need, right? So blood and yin, original chi, like spirit. It's just such a, you know, collapse of yang. It's just such a phenomenal point. And it helps to root the hun, right? Again, think about like the shen is in the hun, the po, all these are like, they're like gas and like this, like effervescent gas. And you need to be able to like, it needs to be kind of like, you know, dissolved in or like rooted in like this juicy fluid, right? So this is a great point also when people just feel exhausted as hell. Just a phenomenal point. Yeah. I'm not sure why it has a powerful effect on the hun. You know, I've read a lot of different texts. They say it has a powerful effect on the hood. I'm not really sure why. There is a particular relationship between the small intestine and the liver via the Chinese clock because they are Chinese clock opposites. So there is that sort of Fushi Bagua relationship, but maybe that's, I don't know. But anyway, it's a really phenomenal point for people with like low energy, low will, resigned, wore out, exhausted, dry, hot, irritated, you know, maybe born with it or through circumstances, chronic illness, have had to deal with it. And they just really super depleted. So this is great for people who are depleted and exhausted. So Shimen, CV5, another great point. Oh, by the way, CV4, often I combine it with stomach 28, which is roughly at the same level, for any kind of deficiency or stagnation during or just before the menstrual cycle, right? So, you know, maybe the week before you start like noticing you're like weeping during dog food commercials. Maybe you're more irritable. Maybe there's a lot of like intense cramping in the beginning, like maybe a lot of clotting. This is a great point to combine with CV8, stomach 28. CV5, this is the front mu of the Sanjiao for like the whole Sanjiao, all three burners. This is also is really good for strengthening the original qi, the yuan qi. And that means it's like also that's code for tonifies the kidneys. So when you're thinking about somebody who's like very yin deficient, CV4, CV5, again, palpate, see which one is more appropriate. I generally choose CV5 over CV4 because of its relationship to the triple heater and how it regulates all three jiao, because CV7, as we'll get to, is the front mu point for the triple heater in the lower jiao. CV5 is the front mu point for the triple heater for all three jiao. Right, so this is like the master triple heater point. So people that have a lot of like heat disparities, fluid disparities between different jiao, like, oh, I feel really hot in the chest, but I feel really cool down here. Or maybe you put your hand on it. Maybe the patient doesn't realize it, but you feel a difference in the jowl. So that's another way. So also there's like a lot of fluid issues going on. Maybe like their ears get clogged, or a lot of phlegm in their throat, or like edema, right? Or maybe a lot of dryness. This is said to open and regulate the water passages, which the triple heater regulates, right? It regulates the network of water passages. It does clear a lot of heat, and you can moxa this point. So yeah, a lot of dryness, a lot of cold, right? One of it's called stone gate, stone door, right? It's also called essential dew, because this, in Chinese, at least in certain like ancient times, an infertile woman was known as a stone woman, right? It was like your garden, the garden of your uterus, was very rocky or like stone, and so no seed can take purchase. So this is a really good point for supporting fertility. There was this rumor that like, well, if you overneedle this point, you can make a woman barren. And believe me, in a country that for many years had a one-child policy, they were looking at every possible way to help support women from getting pregnant. And they did experiment after experiment on this, and needling this point did not prevent people from getting pregnant. So don't worry about that. You're not going to make someone infertile by needling this point. That's just not going to happen. It is good, though, for helping to bring warmth to this area. And now it's like getting to the area where like you're starting to enhance the warmth on a psychological level and emotional level for the experience, like the possibility, like opening to the possibility of intimacy, right? So some people have been through experiences which leave them very cold psychologically, poor relationships, maybe they were emotionally abusive, physically abusive, God forbid. And you'd be surprised at how many of my female patients have had to deal with emotional and physical abuse. I think it's just god awful. I think it's just terrible that men do this, but that's another whole story. And I think it's predominantly because men have disowned their own inner feminine, their inner yin, and don't appreciate it and don't understand it and are disconnected from it. But that's a whole other conversation, which I find very abhorrent and appalling. But at some point something has happened. Maybe you've miscarried, or God forbid, or like a child dies, and that part of our body just goes cold, that part of our mind just goes cold. This is really the beginnings of the stages of where you can support somebody at that level, that heart pericardium level, and supporting their experience of appropriate intimacy and physical contact. All right. I'm going to do CVs 6, 7, and 8, and then we'll take a break. So CV6, this is also like one of my favorite points. It's Sea of Chi. I love the name of it. Chi Hai. I have some Japanese friends, and when they say that, it just, I don't know, it just makes me giggle. It just warms my heart. So this is a major Chi point. As you know, like Chi has many different functions. It warms, it protects, it raises, it moves, it transforms. So anybody with any trouble on that level, body, mind, or spirit, cold, inert, stagnant, stubborn, unmotivated. I do this one point a lot on this one guy I treat. He's talk about judging yourself based on like who you were versus who you are. He is like, he has probably got like the third worst opinion of himself is like any patient I've ever had. The guy is just like has this just awful opinion of himself, and he's starting to accomplish quite a lot, but he hasn't reached the level of like what he would like, and so he's really hard on himself. And so he then responds to that. Again, how does he bear that? By sitting on the couch, right? Masturbating too much, playing Call of Duty too much, eating too much. Thankfully he's not drinking too much now, which is nice. He does smoke less weed, thank God, right? So, he kind of goes into this like yin state, right? And his body he's very well upholstered. You know what I mean? He's got a lot of adipose tissue, but he is starting to lose some weight. So like motivation, so like bladder 23, bladder 52, like CV6, 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 right? This is really good to like, okay, come on, off the couch, off the couch, off the couch, right? It's also good for resolving dampness, which qi is phenomenal at doing, right? Especially dampness in the lower jiao, because it's very tonifying. I'm kind of a geek, so I either, like when I'm moxing this, I generally moxa an odd number of moxa, because in Chinese theory, odd numbers are relatively more yang, even numbers are relatively more even, right? So this is also really good for women who have a lot of symptoms of cold or stagnation in the lower jiao. So you can combine this with CV4 during menstruation if it's painful, like dysmenorrhea or amenorrhea, a lot of leakage. Again, qi holds, qi warms, so leukorrhea. I have this one patient that gets like a lot of asthmatic symptoms at the onset of her period, so this is really good for that. Qi is warming. It helps to nourish also, so this can have an effect on how the kidney qi rises up to grasp the lung qi. So I think that's why it's indicated in symptoms of asthma. And I just think about like, like edema, fluids not getting transformed because there's too much cold, there's not enough warmth, there's not enough transformation. And just think about like mentally, like people just get like edemic in their head, like foggy headed, unmotivated, resigned, they feel heavy, they're exhausted, they, like success begets success, and that's very tonifying. So people who like are hard on themselves, who have a hard time experiencing any kind of success, right? So, failure begets failure, which affects our mindset. So this is a really nice transformative point. It's like, hey, like this jolt, not like GV type of jolt, but it's like this, right? I think about CV as like being slowly like filled up from below, and GV is like being like pulled up from above, right? Okay. All right. This is just like an awesome point to combine with so many other chi points. CV7, I don't really do a whole lot. It is the front move point for the triple heater for the lower burner. Honestly, I rarely do it in my clinic. Again, like a lot of the points in this area, it tonifies the kidney. It's very nourishing for the yin. It helps to, with other points, to regulate the uterus, which means like the cycle of the uterus, like how much blood is let go during the period, the relative smoothness of the qi during the cycle. It is said to be good for clearing heat. Again, it's a triple heater related point. Triple heater generates and regulates fluid, which cools heat. So I don't think it really clears heat so much as cools heat, right? Like Jingwell points, Ying Spring points, they're more about clearing heat, opening things to the exterior and getting them out that way. I think this like sort of like cools heat and maybe helps to invigorate the process of urination. But it's really, I think, more about bringing some cooling aspects to the lower jiao, where there's like maybe excessive uterine bleeding because the heat is pushing the blood out, or a lot of genital itching, right? This is a really good point for that. Generally, when I use this point, it's really just for this one female engineer I treat. She works for NASA, and she's got like, she came down with a sort of like liver parasite when she was doing a mission trip to Haiti with her Christian organization. And she got infected with a parasite and infected her liver. And so there's like a lot of like heat in the blood, heat in the lower jiao. So this is a point I occasionally needle kind of superficially to kind of like stimulate the fluids to cool the heat and to sort of relax that irritating heat that's like making the genitals itch. All right. CV8 though, boy, this is an amazing point. Obviously, you're just going to mox it because it is ostensibly a scar, and you're not going to needle into a scar. So you're going to mox at this point. It's in the center of the umbilicus. This is said to be a good point to rescue the yang. So some so in some texts it's called Spirit's Palace Gate, or the gateway to the palace of the spirit, right? Which is sort of like the umbilicus is the gateway to our prenatal existence, right? And prenatal influences. It's also called by Worsley's spirit deficiency. It's also sometimes called chi abode or life stem, which if, of course, you think about it literally, that's what the umbilical cord is. It's the life stem of the baby and the mother. So so in the Shen Chu, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry, Q-U-E. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. So Shen is like the spirit. Q can be seen as a palace or a watchtower. And so the watchtower is like that tower above the gates, within the city gates, but above the city gates, looking out so you can see what's coming. So it allows one to prepare and to summon, the military, the military or the armed forces that can then be called upon to protect the city and the gateway to the city, right? That's the precious interior, right? So this has a powerful effect on the Wei Qi, right? You're summoning this Yang Qi. That's like your cavalry that's being like called to protect, like almost like the border guards, right? Like you're like the National Guard. You're summoning the National Guard to line up to protect the exterior, right? To protect your exterior both psychologically as well as physically, right? And what does it do that? Like, how does it do that? So the resources that it uses to finance this capacity is the original qi, the spleen qi, and the yang qi, right? The original qi, the spleen qi, and the yang qi, right? So this is really good for tonifying the kidneys, tonifying the spleen. Again, holding, resisting, protecting, right? This is really good. Ironically, again, right? Everything's a balance. So you're using this incredibly yin point, right? That deals with like our connection to the mother. It doesn't get more yin than that. Like, this on the front of the body, in the center of the front of the body, right? The fulcrum of the transition between life, postnatal life and prenatal life, that's connected to the mother, which is relatively yin, right? But then what does it do? It supports the yang. So this is really good for tonifying some aspects of the yin, to be sure, the original qi, the spleen, the kidneys, but also very, very powerful at rescuing deficient yang. So again, people are like unmotivated, they're cold, they can't activate in life, right? So this is a nice point actually to combine with GV4, which are relatively at the same level, which is called gate of life. And this is called, spirit gate or life stem, right? So, they have a very similar nature, just one, and again, like GV4 is also really good, not just stimulating the yang qi, but also supporting the very things that allow us to be alive, which is a very yin quality. So they have there's always a balance. There's always this like functional relative balance, right? I just love that about Chinese medicine. So this also helps us to kind of get back in touch with the mother, right? The mother with the capital M, which is like the earth, which no matter what we do, again, within limits, of course, the world keeps, the earth keeps bringing forth life every spring, right? It's such a miracle. Where there was nothing, now there's something, right? So that arising of life, that's that yin quality that I was talking about. It seems yang on the exterior because like something is moving up and outward. So there is a yang movement. But where does it come from? It becomes from the abyss, this void, right, of nothingness. And then something starts to stir and move and arise. And that's a very yin quality. So you've always got this balance of yin and yang. And so this really helps to like foster feelings of being supported, being nourished, being fed, being held, right? Regardless of what your childhood experience was like with your mother or your parents, right? So it really helps us kind of get back in touch with like our own maternal qualities. Even men have maternal qualities, right? So, you know, it helps like somebody who's very deficient in those things or who's unable to kind of summon and then give those things, right? So it's really good for people who are very depleted, very exhausted. Nice point to combine with CV4. I call it the mama never loved me point. You know, like some people just had like horrific childhoods. They didn't get much of a mother. And maybe they had a mother, but it wasn't very nurturing, wasn't very nourishing, didn't help you feel safe, right? So this is a great point for people like that. All right, so excuse me. So why don't we take a break? Is 10 minutes enough? All right, so let's take a break till 10:55. Okay, so with CV9, water divide, Worsley calls it water division or water separation. This is said to control the water passages and to help the body transform the fluids, right? So obviously this is going to be good for any kind of like water accumulation, fluid accumulation situation, edema, um, you know, pooling of water, like sometimes before the period. A lot of my female patients, just before their period, they retain water. You know, they've taken off their rings. I treat a lot of pregnant women with back pain. I am the pregnant women with back pain whisperer. I don't know. I just like that's how I got lucky. So you know, a lot of them like they're retaining a lot of water, a lot of fluids, obviously in the front, but all over. This is a really nice point. Obviously, you're not going to needle this point on a pregnant woman, but you can have them self-massage. You can do some gentle moxa on this, even when they're pregnant. Again, they say like not to like needle the abdomen of a pregnant woman, but you can, I think, do like 3 to 5 moxa on this point. Seems to be okay. I ran this by a few people. They were like, you know, just be careful, make sure they don't have like very high blood pressure or like tendency towards preeclampsia. But other than that, it's good. But on like people who are not pregnant, this is a great point to moxa for any kind of edema relating to spleen or kidney deficiency. Right? This is great for edema related to spleen or kidney deficiency. I'm just looking at something real quick here. Okay. Again, it's not a point I do a whole lot, like on a psychological level. It's really about people feeling bogged down, heavy, not just chi deficient, but like it's not like I don't have the energy to get up. This is also like I feel like something is weighing down on me, right? Which is a little bit of a different sensation, right? And if you think about it, this is CV9. 9 is 3 squared. 3 is the number of chi, so this is a really chi activating point. Sometimes you can combine it with CV6 and other spleen points. This is really good to combine with the AEPs of spleen and kidney. Bladder 18, bladder 20, very good for supporting the fluids and also, especially more so this point, accumulation of fluids. CV10, lower duct. This is relatively in line with stomach 23. Some call it lower stomach cavity. I learned it as lower duct by JR. This also crosses with the spleen channel, so this is really good for dampness. I generally use it more to help harmonize the middle and lower jowl regarding digestion, helping the stomach chi descend. It is said to be a good harmonizer for the stomach and intestines. Again, it's like the lower border of the middle jowl, right, just above CV9. So this is really good for like relieving food stagnation. In regards to CV10, CV11, CV12, CV13, really more about CV10, 12, and 13. These are all great points for food stagnation. You know, you eat, then you feel kind of distended, you feel kind of over full. You feel like things are slow to empty. There may be some epigastric pain, maybe some pain in that sort of like, I don't know if you can see it, like just sort of below the, like here's CV16, so like just below there, there's a lot of like epigastric pain. The solar plexus or in the middle of the belly. a lot of borborygmus, which is a $10 word for a lot of stomach grumbling and noise, abdominal pain or fullness, maybe even to the point of vomiting, or like you eat and then you suddenly have diarrhea, like an urge to move your bowels. This is a great point for that. So in regards to 10, 12, or 13, again, go by palpation. But I also think about it in terms of timing after one eats. So 10, 12, 13, in addition to palpation, you know, and the response either I get from the patient or what I feel, I might choose one of these depending on how long after someone eats do I choose to treat these points for that fullness, acid regurgitation, reflux, epigastric fullness or pain, distension. How soon after one eats does one experience these symptoms? If it's right away, I go more towards CV14, 13, right? If it's right after they eat, more towards CV13, 14. If it's a little while after they eat, maybe towards CV12. If it's like maybe like an hour or two after they eat, maybe CV10, right? Right. This is also a really good point for when someone is kind of overfull in life and really just can't absorb or digest or take in anymore. I think about you guys around week 12, right? This is like you starting to like, yeah, I think I'm like kind of done. Maybe you get that at like week 10, maybe week 4. If you're getting it like week 3 or 4, I would suggest CV14 or 13. Just massage that on yourself with spleen 2 like all the time. But if it's like hitting you the rank around, you know, like week 10, week 12, like maybe CV12, like, oh, you know, like week 13, 12, 13, 14, maybe this is like a CV10 type point. You know, people like overstimulated, overly exposed to like an excessive amount of information, data, things to deal with. Also, people have like a lot of cold in their diet. You're going to be doing a lot of these middle jowl CV points. Again, palpation, signs and symptoms. Maybe look at the points that are in the neighborhood, right? CV10 is in the neighborhood of stomach 23. So maybe there's a lot of indications for stomach 23, and you do CV10 as an adjunct point, right? So that's another way of using it. Let's see, what else? Yeah, that's basically it. This is also one of the points that I combine with CV8, CV10, CV6, and stomach 25 bilaterally. CV10, CV6, CV8, stomach 25 bilaterally. For people who are like experiencing a lot of like jet lag, right? They do a lot of traveling and they experience a lot of jet lag, or people who feel extremely like pulled or blown in a lot of different directions. They've got a lot of people pulling on them. Maybe they have siblings that are really needy. They've got a partner that's needy. They've got kids that are needy. They've got parents that are needy, right? You know, the generation before you, the generation after you, people in sort of like your generation, which are like siblings, people at work, you know, you're just like being pulled in all these directions. You're kind of like losing your sense of stability, getting ungrounded, overly burdened. Then you might start experiencing symptoms of like dizziness, vertigo, ungroundedness, hard to settle, right? Hard to feel like there's time for you. You've kind of like lost your, maybe even your sense of self. Like, you know, like some people kind of like lose themselves in this situation, especially people who like, you know, weren't brought up with a lot of like people pulling on them, you know, like it's kind of a new experience for them and they're like unsure how to like hold their center. You know, this is really good combination for like to reinforce the idea that like my needs precede your wants. My needs precede your wants, right? Yes, I get that you want this, but this is something that I need right now. I need to eat right now. I need to take a break. I will tend to your needs in about 15, 20 minutes, right? I need to meditate. You need to go take a walk. All right. So that's my CV10 kind of go-to point for that. CV11, I don't really do that much. It's called Strengthen the Interior. I learned it as established mile. It's said to ease the constraint of chi stagnation or excess heat in the local area. You know, helping to support, you know, extracting the essence and the goods from what you eat, right? The essence of nourishment from our food. It's also good for rebellious stomach chi, like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. These are all really good for rebellious stomach chi. Again, I would go by palpation. I would go by maybe timing, like how long after one eats does one experience this? You can kind of use your intuition about it. You know, it's said that CV10 regulates the lower part of the stomach, which represents like the pylorus of the stomach and the duodenum, right? CV12 is said to regulate the middle part. I know we're on 11, but I'm just telling you, like CV12 is like regulating like the middle part, sort of like the body of the stomach. And then CV13 is said to regulate the upper part of the stomach, which is represented by the transition from the esophagus into the stomach, okay? So CV10, lower part, the pylorus valve, as the stomach empties into the duodenum or duodenum of the small intestine. CV12 is sort of like the middle part, the body of the stomach, and then CV13 is more about the upper part, you know, that valve between the esophagus and the stomach. CV11, I don't know, like maybe it's just never made much of an impression on me as a budding practitioner, so maybe I just don't rely on that much. Maybe it's going to be like your go-to point. Again, it's going to be regulating the stomach chi. Again, it's sort of between 10 and 12. So, you know, it's between the lower part and the middle aspects of the stomach. So palpation, you know, signs and symptoms, you know, intuition, maybe that kind of draws your attention to 11. I don't really do it that much. It's just said to strengthen the middle jiao and to move things through the middle jiao that get stuck, right? So helps to descend the stomach chi. CV12, I do a lot more often. This is said to regulate the stomach chi. So what does that mean? It means that the stomach chi should be going in the right direction with the right intensity, with the right timing, right? So it shouldn't go up. It shouldn't go down too forcefully where you have explosive diarrhea or an urge to defecate right after eating, right? So it's also said to help regulate or resolve dampness, resolve dampness in the middle burner. So maybe there's a lot of heat that's cooking the fluids, or maybe the person's eating a very damp diet and things are accumulating in the middle burner. So this is said to tonify the stomach and spleen's ability to manage the gu qi, the food qi, right? So really this is said to be as a front mu point of the stomach and in an influential point of the yang organs, right? So it's a mu point of the stomach. It's an influential point for all the yang organs because the stomach is said to dominate the fu, right? It's the yang organ of yang organs, right? Because it's so involved in like digestion, into processing things, food, information, life experiences. It's to help it to put it into a form or a state that helps us to integrate it, right? So it puts things like the food and drink into like the 100-degree soup that allows the spleen and the small intestine and the large intestine to process digestion, right? So it puts it in the state that we need. Similarly, it helps us to like manage situations, life experiences, and to put them into a perspective or state that helps us to like integrate that into our life, right? Things that are hard to integrate, painful experiences beyond our past experience. Like, oh, I've never had to deal with this before. Well, this is a new food. Like, how do I digest this? This is a new experience. How do I digest this? How do I bear this experience? Sorry, my phone keeps ringing. And if we put it off and I'll deal with it later, we put it off, I'll deal with it later, guess what? That's dampness accumulating, which leads to stagnation, which leads to more dampness, right? So don't put things off. Like, chew on it now and try to integrate it now. What can I use of this that's useful, that I can integrate, that can be nourishing for my life, this experience? or what doesn't serve, what really doesn't resonate with me, and now I can really just let this go. Like I can just, yeah, this doesn't serve. I can let this move on, right? I'll let the large intestine aspects of me, the small intestine aspects of me, to sort it out and retain what's of essential value and to transport what's no longer serving, okay? CV13, upper stomach cavity. Again, this is a point that I do more often for physical reasons. It's also called upper duct by Worsley. This again helps qi and stomach qi descend. It helps to move stagnating gu qi, you know, if we've like eaten too much or we've eaten what we would consider to be a regular amount, or your patient has eating, like, you know, you investigate how much they're eating and the way they're eating, and it seems reasonable. And, you know, you feel like you can trust their accuracy of how much they're eating, but they suddenly feel over full despite eating just a little bit, and they've not had bariatric surgery. Then this can help like move that qi, help the processing of the digestion, help the processing of the gu qi, the creation of the gu qi, like soon after eating, right? It helps with digestion, transformation, transportation of the spleen, assimilation by the spleen, right? So now we're in like the upper part. So we're starting to get towards CV14, which is the front move of the heart. So we're now just starting to get like merge these influences of the heart, right? So, you know, are our desires digestible? Are we desiring life experiences that are nourishing for us, that we can easily integrate or relatively easily integrate into our life? So are you striving for something that's unreasonable and really more about like your conditioned mind, really more about these superficial egoic driven preferences? Like, man, I really want to make like $1 million by the time I'm 30. Well, what's motivating that? Is that going to nourish you, or is that just going to like fill you up with a lot of empty calories, right? I mean, I like Funyuns, you know, I love Funyuns, but I mean, how much nourishment is a Funyun really giving me? Um, I used to, I don't know if it was your class, maybe it was somebody from your class. I remember one day walking into school, and on the board, there was like this anonymous gift and hello and thank you note with this little gift bag. And I opened the gift bag and there's Funyuns inside of it. I thought that was kind of sweet. That was very endearing. So if that was one of you, thank you. If it wasn't one of you, maybe you know who it was and you can thank them for me. But this is a great point for people who experience a lot of like bloating, distension, reflux, like soon after eating, rebellious qi soon after eating, especially when there's signs of cold, slow pulse, slow and slippery pulse. They feel cold, they're worse with cold, they're better with heat. Maybe they put a hot compress on them, you know, that helps them. A lot of hiccuping, belching, right? That's also a sign of rebellious qi, epigastric pain in the upper part of the solar plexus, which actually may now start to be agitating the shen, which might lead to like insomnia. So people who eat late at night, they're not able to fully digest their food, then you have a hard time falling asleep, or they have a crappy night's sleep. Right now it's affecting the shen, it's affecting the heart, right? This is a great point for that. CV14, also a phenomenal point. This is the front move point of the heart. It's sometimes called Great Palace Gate. Obviously, it's the gateway to the Great Palace that houses the emperor or the empress, right, inside this forbidden city. So it's this gateway to what's very precious, what needs to be protected at all costs. Worsley called it great deficiency because he felt that like when the heart qi, heart yin, heart blood is deficient, the spirit really suffers, and not just in a little way, but in a big way, in a great way, like die, right? But this is Juche, Great Palace Gate, Great Gateway, gateway to the Great Palace, and which is like, this is where the heart resides, the palace of where the heart lives. Physically, it's the gateway to the palace of the pericardium and the heart, right, where the physical heart resides. Psycho-emotionally, it's like our deep interior where we feel tender feelings, the inner knowing part of us, right, the inner, the heart mind, which knows what's, with a capital K, what's best for us with a capital B, right? So not only is this a great point for subduing rebellious stomach chi, right, acid regurgitation, GERD, acid reflux. Maybe after you eat, you also feel kind of psychologically upset, right? This is a great point for that. A lot of like food issues can be treated with this. People like at the like the severe end of the scale, it turns into like anorexia or bulimia. Like I immediately, like one, I want to starve myself, or like I can't psychologically accept a sense of fullness and satiation, and I have to immediately empty. You know, I'm thinking, I was in a relationship with somebody who was bulimic, chronic bulimic, right? And so an inability to receive, an inability, and we could, you know, talk about bulimia and anorexia for like a year because it's such a complicated case. It's not just this like, oh yeah, this is why someone's anorexic, this is why someone's bulimic. It's a very complicated, comprehensive treatment plan that's needed on many levels. But basically, you know, someone who has a hard time receiving psychologically, emotionally, physically, that can agitate the heart. This opposition to fulfillment, this inability to feel fulfilled, can generate a lot of heat, which then also aggravates the mind, aggravates the heart, aggravates the shen, right? Which can result in accumulations in the chest, in the upper burner, right? So that can show up as damp. It can show up over time chronically as phlegm. And we all know that damp and phlegm can build up and accumulate to such a degree that it can block or obscure the orifices of the heart, which is like your sense organs, right? There's so much phlegm and turbidity and dampness that's invading the head that it obscures our ability to actually perceive reality accurately. And that will disturb the shen, irritability, mania, anxiety, depression, maybe moving from anxiety to depression, right? Bipolar disorder, okay? So it helps us to kind of get back to the heart of our heart, to, over time, it does take time, to resolve these burdensome elements, these burdensome factors that obscure our ability to perceive life accurately. And we all know that people with, generally, more often than not, people with anorexia, bulimia, they suffer from what's called dysmorphia, which is an inability to perceive ourselves and our form accurately, right? All right, so this is a great point for that. Or just people that just like dealing with either acutely or chronically intense emotions that they're like, that are hard to bear. Remember, again, like, you know, how do we bear what we must bear in life, right? So maybe you're moving into another phase of life. You're having to take care of an ailing parent or an ailing partner or an ailing sibling, or, you know, you just suddenly lost your job after being in this job for like 20 years, or there's the job like fizzled out and everybody was laid off. You know, how do you bear these burdens? Like, to what degree do you take it to heart? And can you take it to heart in an appropriate way that allows you to work it through, to digest it, to find out what's going to serve you in this way, what can support and nourish you, and what you need to let go of, right? It can also be from an acute situation, people experiencing shock. This is a great point for people who are in this like kind of protracted experience of shock. Something suddenly happened that was really hard to integrate into your life. You witnessed something traumatic. You observed something traumatic. You experienced something suddenly traumatic. Car accident. You witnessed somebody, God forbid, somebody like getting sick or getting you know, you witness something, you witness some sudden experience, like you witness a car accident, you witness somebody getting injured, like something suddenly happens that is hard to, that's destabilizing, like you lose your center. And your heart is like the upper center of the center, right? This anterior median line represents some aspect of center. CV8 is like the center of the center. CV4 is like the center of the lower jowl. CV12 is like the center of the middle jowl. CV17 is the center of the upper jowl. But this is like this transition point, CV14 to 16. Like your heart is kind of like your spiritual center, your emotional center, right? So is something, affecting that on the body, mind, spirit level. Maybe somebody's not getting enough nourishment, and in a chronic way, which uncenters them, it ungrounds them, and now it's disturbing their shen. CV14 is a great point to deal with that, right? Dysmorphia. People who are just unable to like accurately perceive their reality in a really deep level, like CV14 is really good for like awakening the shen of the shen, right? The heart is about maintaining control and order out of the chaos of life, right? Because there's so many things going on that are outside of our control. What can we exert our control over? We can control over, like, we can actually exert some measure of control over some small sphere of our reality. And this helps to kind of like center us back into our heart, reconnect us to our heart mind, our intuition, our inner sense of like to re-stimulate that inner sense of like what's right for us, what's not right for us, right? Which can be lost over, a lifetime of poor eating, poor decisions, poor habits. CV15, sort of an extension of that. It's the low connecting point of the CV. It's also said to be the front move point of the pericardium in some traditions, like in the Worsley tradition especially. So obviously it's going to help calm the shen, right? It's said to be the source point of all 5 yin organs, right? It's said to be the source point of all 5 yin organs, according to the Ling Shu, I think. I don't remember what chapter. That it affects the yuan qi of all the yin organs, which I think is really cool. So I think it's really helpful, again, thinking about the relationship to the pericardium as like the container, the protector of the heart, right? It contains, protects, centers, grounds the heart. It circulates the blood, which houses the shen. And it also is said to be the source point, the yuan source point for all the yin organs. So, if you think about the relationship between that and the pericardium and the heart, for me, it's like when someone's emotions are out of control, right? Or a specific emotion, like maybe not just all emotions, maybe they're not like a complete emotional wreck, but maybe like they have a real hard time with one emotion. So how do we bear our emotions? Are they a burden? Are they something that adds just to the natural roller coaster of life, right? Some people prefer the merry-go-round. They want a life like a merry-go-round. But for some of us, that's really boring. We want the roller coaster, right? And sometimes, like we're at the tail end of the roller coaster where we feel like we're being whipped around and it's very intense. Sometimes we're at the front of the roller coaster where we feel like the intense wind and the intensity of it, but there's still like some stability and control because you can kind of see what's happening, what's coming, what's going on, right? You can kind of guide the coaster a little bit, maybe, not a perfect analogy. Maybe like you're in the canoe on the river, right? And, you're the one with the oar in your hand. Right? So you may not control where the river goes, but you can kind of control a little bit how to navigate that river, how to bear these emotions that can be very destabilizing for some people. Some people feel things so intensely, and that can be a hard thing to bear, but it is your nature. So this is what's going to help you be a great you. So how do you navigate and bear this, right? By connecting to your inner heart, right? Connecting to your heart protector, knowing that you're protected, knowing that you're loved, knowing that you have the resources you need to bear what you need to bear. You have the blood, you've got the qi, you've got the jing, you've got the jin ye, right? So the low point of the Ren is also said to send out these connecting vessel branches, right? Again, pericardium is about connections, harmony with the triple heater, right? Circulating and sending the shen via the blood to all 4 corners of the kingdom. And it's said that the low point at this point is said to send out these like branches of qi, similar to spleen 21, these like little collateral branches of blood vessels branching out and fanning out all over the chest and the abdomen. So when there's excess, it sort of absorbs the excess, and when it's deficient, it absorbs the, it supplies the deficiency. But for me, is there a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, a lot of emotions affecting the heart in the point where it now becomes kind of a destabilizing experience, right? This is also a great point for like excesses of emotions, like phobias, paranoia, obsessions. Also, when there's like heart palpitations, you can combine this with CV14 or 15. When there's a lot of heart palpitations, anxiety, right? While you're experiencing worry, while you're experiencing all of the 7 emotions, right? You're not just having an emotional experience. It's like, it feels like it's destabilizing. It feels like it has you, like we're almost had by it rather than something that we have. Again, it feels like the emotional experience is kind of taking us for a ride rather than us riding this current of emotion. So this is really good for that. CV16, I generally, it's said to regulate the accumulations in the chest, right? It's center courtyard, middle hall, Worsley calls it middle hall, central palace, central courtyard. It's right just below the sternum, at that border between the sternum and the top of the xiphoid process. It's in that little sort of like crook. To me, it's like it represents such a vulnerable spot. It's an outstanding point for even more than like a heart protector who tends to feel very vulnerable, or maybe our emotional experiences make us feel very vulnerable, and CV15 is good for that. But this is really good for when people are like really losing it. They're like anxious in ways that like they're just not able to control themselves. They need a lot of medication. Things are just like, emotions are just like pushing, like flinging them around everywhere. There's a lot of emotional lability, a lot of anxiety, heart palpitations, maybe even like the breathing is affected. So you can combine this with CV17 or upper kidney points to help regulate the breath, regulate the lung qi, regulate the relationship and connection between the heart and the lungs. But I just do this like sometimes just as a standalone point to settle the shen, settle the spirit. Okay, remember, you're in the courtyard. What's a courtyard? It's a place where people can just like chill out and relax, right? You have a casual conversation, right? This isn't the boardroom where like, the transactions, these like life and death transactions are occurring, where like, the future depends on this decision. This is where you like hang out with a buddy and just kind of like, shoot the breeze, right? Or where you sit, you kind of relax, you listen to the wind, you listen to the trees, right? Maybe there's a water feature. You're just kind of taking it in, you're mulling things over, right? It has a watery kind of quality to it, like almost like inner courtyard. I think about inner courtyard, right? The courtyard is this safe, protected place. You're exposed to the exterior, right? Think about also like kidney 22, like, you're not sealed away inside. You get to experience the enjoyment of the weather, and you see the sky, and you see some trees, you hear some birds, right? So you're exposed, you have access to the influence of the heavenly chi from the outside, but you're in a protected place, right? Just like the ribs curling down, the sternum above, the xiphoid below, right? You're in a safe, protected space where people can just like chill out, mull over things, let their mind wander, connect to their intuition, maybe have a casual conversation with a friend that makes you feel like happy and safe and protected. You're not solving the world's problems. CV17, a point I also do very, very frequently. Some people say this is the front mu of the pericardium. It's also called the upper C of Qi because this is a C of Qi point in the C of Qi that you would do as like as a 3-point combination with CV9 and I think bladder 11. I can't remember. I'm blanking out at the moment. But it's the level of kidney 23, right? So you think about like, storehouse, like, okay, yeah, this is like giving me something that like is nourishing for me, is supporting. It's like, it's about resources, and the resource here is qi predominantly, right? So obviously this is really good for tonifying the Zheng qi, right? The chest qi, the Zhong qi, Z-H-O-N-G qi, Z-H-O-N-G. This is the chest qi that, that helps contribute the air towards the rest of the qi that my body needs. It's related to the heart and the lungs. This is a great point for people who are dealing with a lot of respiratory issues that are also relatively deficient, right? Now, again, qi moves, qi warms. So if there's a lot of cold and maybe people have some accumulations of phlegm or damp in the chest because of cold, because of qi deficiency, this can be a really good point, especially to moxa. You can needle this point. And I would angle it upwards. If there's a lot of deficiency, I would angle it downwards. If there's a lot of deficiency related rebellious qi. So what's rebellious qi look like? Hiccups, coughing, right? Inappropriate wheezing, like you suddenly wheeze, like you're kind of get a coughing fit, or a lot of wheezing or hiccuping, right? Belching. So this is really good at helping to dispel fullnesses from the chest, to help the descending aspects of the qi, as well as the qi creation aspects that like are the qi contributions from the lungs, from the air, right? So this is really great for like accumulations based on an inner deficiency. You feel the pulse, it feels deficient. You look at the tongue, maybe there's a crack or sort of a dip in the lung area. Maybe it's very dry, maybe it's very wet, right? Both of those are from deficiency of fluids or an excess of fluids based on a qi deficiency, because qi transforms and moves. So this is really good for clearing the lungs, stimulating the lungs. Any kind of respiratory condition, you can add this point. It's just so phenomenal. Great to moxa, even if there's heat. Great to needle. I know some people say it's forbidden, but you can. It's fine. You can also combine this point with Du 20 and Kidney 1. It's considered to be like represent the three treasures of the Jing, the Qi, and the Shen, right? So Du 20 affects the Shen, CV17 affects the Qi, especially between the heart and the lungs, and Kidney 1 affects the Jing, right? These are the three treasures. These are the three resources that we need to be a great human being, right? To bear the burdens of our humanity. We have to deal with our Jing, we have to deal with our Qi, which is like the daily mundane crap, and then we have to, the aspirations of the spirit, right? To be connected to heaven and so forth. That's Du 20, CV17, and Kidney 1, right? Du 20, CV17, Kidney 1. You can do them in whatever order you like. Does someone need to be like lifted and supported, or does somebody need to be like settled and relaxed, right? Because again, you can be unsettled and manic and yang presentation because you have a deficiency, right? Think about all of a sudden, like, maybe you go to the ATM and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, this thing says I've got $11.35. You're not going to be like, well, okay. I mean, like some of us are just like freak out, right? You're gonna feel a rush of qi, right? So, just because somebody is like yang in presentation doesn't mean they're really deficient. Okay? So this is a great point also to combine with lung 9 and heart 7 when there's an irregularity of the heart rate. So CV17, lung 9, heart 7 is a nice combination for an irregularity of heartbeat, irregularity of heart rate. CV18, I don't really do that much. It's really good for accumulation pains in the chest, coughing, asthma, from like damp accumulations. It's called Jade Hall, which is cool, or Jade Court, or Jade's Beauty. So, I generally do it not so much for the physical things. I mean, there's so many upper kidney and so many upper CV points that all deal with pain in the chest from accumulations of damp and phlegm, asthma, and cough, right? Those are like, CV17 through CV21, pain in the chest, cough, asthma, maybe even vomiting. It's like from damp accumulations, which is super rare because we don't live in the tropics. We don't live in a very damp environment. This is not England, right? It's not Malaysia. So, but almost all of these points are really good for pain from accumulation of damp phlegm in the chest, cough, asthma, right? So you can just ditto for all these points. So what differentiates it beyond palpation for me is, jade implies something valuable and important, right? And it's over the heart, right? So like, interestingly enough, the heart chakra can be pink or red, but it can also be green. It can also be light green colored, which is like a jade color, right? And it is the court, right? This is the courtyard of the heart. This is like where you would go to, have court with, like, the heart would give you court, right? You would, to court someone, to court something means like you are presenting yourself to something with humility and supplication and reverence, right? Like in the old days, dating was called courting, because in a way, like you're submitting yourself for consideration by the other person, right? So jade court means you're courting something that's very precious, very beautiful, and what's more precious and beautiful than yourself, your inner self, like who you really are, right? So this is great for when patients feel weak, very cut off from their inner guidance, cut off from their inner intuition, cut off from their inner nature. Their communications with themselves or others feel forced. Like I think about like these commercials for depression medication. You've got this person who's like in the midst of this like happy experience, and they're putting, they show this like little thing on a stick. It's like they put on this like happy face that they're showing the world, but they just can't seem to get into anything going on with them. They can't really seem to connect to the joy that's available to them. They can't really connect to their own inner virtues, so they don't really see the beauty of themselves. They don't see the beauty of their own heart. So when there's a lot of lack of ease with this, if the patient's not feeling some measure of ease deep down regarding what they're doing, because like sometimes you're doing something, it's like it's a pain in the ass, right? You're fulfilling some homework obligation or some work obligation or even some parental obligation. It's like it's not all sweetness and light, like changing diapers in the middle of the night. Like it's there is some sweetness to it and there's some joy to it, but like on the outside it might be like a challenge, right? Assignments, obligations, things like that. But deep down you should be feeling some measure of ease with what you're doing and who you're being. And if you're not, then you need to seriously like reconsider either what you're doing, how you're doing it, or why you're doing it. So if you're not underneath all of the like BS discomfort of like, oh, I'm doing something new, which requires some effort and some discomfort in my part. I may feel vulnerable or I may feel exposed, right? Like, or this is something new. I don't know if I'm going to be good at this, right? Starting to practice actually, like, wow, like I feel vulnerable. I feel a little shaky, but deep down, there should be some sense of ease or contentment. And if there's not, you need to either seriously consider, the patient needs to seriously consider what they're doing, how they're doing it, or why they're doing it. Because not everything is meant to be easy. Not everything is meant to be comfortable and joyful. But underneath the superficial details, there should be some measure of contentment or ease or joy or a sense of, yeah, this is right for me, right? And this is a nice point to do when people are starting to feel that. It hasn't been going on for a long period of time. They're just starting to become aware of like this not at ease quality, right? So CV19, I kind of joke that this is like the COVID-19 point, because it is good for accumulations of phlegm in the chest and in the lungs. It calms the spirit. It's good for pain in the chest. It's good for cough. It's good for asthma, like all these other CV points, right? But this is also purple palace, and it's sort of in line with kidney 25, right? CV 18 was more in line with kidney 24. So you think about matters of identity. Again, I was talking about like, is who I am and what I'm doing like in alignment? right? That's kidney 24, right? Am I burying my spirit to just kind of go along to get along, or am I like really exerting my spirit to be a potent force in the world, right? That brings me joy, that brings me satisfaction. But sometimes, like over time, like, you know, maybe the emphasis is more on like the burdensome aspects, right? These damp accumulations that are like weighing me down physically through my diet, physically through my lack of activity, maybe mentally through I'm getting caught in these stories or mindsets that like weigh me down, that they're kind of negative, that they're hard to transform, maybe a lot of worry, right? So kidney 25 and CV19 to the rescue, right? Metaphorically, you know, purple is considered to be metaphorically the color that's all the 5 elements combined, right? So metaphorically, if you combine all the colors of the 5 elements, you would get purple. So in this sense, purple palace is like one step among several steps along the journey traversing the sternum, but also represents this place of wisdom, this connection to the Tao, maybe even representing the best our lineage has to offer and the abundance that's available there, right? So you're bringing in all this like CV 17, 18, 19, 20, you're infusing the chest, and you're infusing your life with all this like heavenly chi, which on the physical level is air, like pure air, clean air, a deep breath, right? And that helps to kind of sustain you, inspire you, and give you the chi that you need to kind of continue on to bear, you know, your own humanity. So I do this point actually a lot for people who are very anxious and upset about the COVID-19 pandemic. I just think that that's really kind of like this weird irony. All right, so CV20, flower covering. I'm just going to do 2 more points, 20 and then 24. So 20, flower covering, also known as florid canopy, flower canopy, the lungs of the canopy. This is like, long story short, and I hope you don't mind if I can go just like maybe like 2 minutes over. If you have to leave, I understand that, but I just want to make sure I get these 2 in. So the Su Wen refers to the lungs as the canopy of the 5 Zong and the 6 Fu, both by its orientation physically at the top of all the others, but also relating to like the Wei Qi that surrounds and contains like the human being that's at the most superficial aspect of us. And so I use this points often with other points to move qi through the chest to help unblock a lot of qi that's stagnating because a lot of grief and sadness. Grief and sadness, grief from the lungs, sadness from the heart and pericardium. So this can stagnate the qi, can generate a lot of heat. Heat dries things out. The lungs don't like that. It likes a certain amount of dryness and moisture, but like it has to be a little bit moist, right? So this as well is also reminding a patient of their preciousness, their beauty, similar to like Jade Hall, as supported by the aspects of CV, right? The chi and the fluids, as well as their beauty and connection to the heavenly chi, right? This is at the level of kidney 26, which is really interesting, right? You know, amidst elegance. So this reinforces this idea that we are worthwhile at a very basic foundational level. You are worth taking up space. You are worth the breath you draw. You know, you are worth the air you breathe. And the fact that you exist is proof of that. So in that experience of worthlessness, lack of value, low self-esteem, that can lead us feeling very empty inside, very a sense of a void inside. And so this leads many people to addiction. So this is a point that I very often treat when someone is dealing with any kind of addiction whatsoever, right? So on a subtle level, like, you know, on a physical level, this is help for clearing phlegm out of the lungs, along with lung 5, and maybe some other points like upper kidney points. This is a good point for like expelling phlegm out of the lungs. And phlegm on a more subtle level can represent the unprocessed, unintegrated experiences, in this case, that have to do with loss and grief. So things get stuck in the chest, right? Our grief gets stuck in the chest, and it sort of like over time ends up becoming concretizing and becoming substantial with phlegm. And so this is a great point also to deal with addictions when the Po is not in strong communication with the heart Shen and the liver Hun. So in addictions, the Po is not in good communication with the heart Shen and liver Hun. We lose sense of who we are. We lose sense of our identity. We lose sense of our purpose. We lose sense of our value. We lose sense of like our inner intuition that's guiding us towards living in a way that sustains us and helps us to feel fulfilled and content, right? So we long for this transcendent experience, but unfortunately we pursue it or seek it inappropriately or inappropriate means in the mundane, which is like, you know, heroin, shopping, porn, alcohol, smoking, relationships, whatever. So this is why it like never really ends well. And this is all really according to me. This is not like from the classics. This is like the lexicon of time gelati. So, you know, when people lose sense of, when their their visceral experience of their humanity loses connection with the Hun and the heart, the Hun of the liver and the heart, Shen of the heart, we long for the transcendent and inspirational and elevating. We seek it out in the mundane things of life, right? The stuff of life. And that ends up creating stagnation and deficiency, right? Okay. And so lastly, CV24, great point for when people are really dry and in need of moisture. It's called supporting liquids. Worsley called it receiving fluids. It's a phenomenal point for, in combination with some other points, large intestine 1 and other extra points on the finger, for supporting salivation and moisture in the mouth. As some people get older or you're dealing with certain medications, it can really dry out the mouth. This is an amazing point for clearing out external wind or exterior wind that's affecting the face, right? So that'll show up not as numbness and hemiplegia like Bell's palsy, but more like edema and puffiness and swelling of the face, right? The wind is stagnating the chi from moving through and stagnating the fluids, right? And so this is really good for like moving fluids in the face, also for enhancing and supporting salivation, right? And adding some juiciness, right? Also, like there's a lot of heat in the mouth, so you can combine this with stomach 4 and bleeding stomach 45 for people that get like a lot of fever blisters or a lot of like, what do you call it? Like canker sores, things like that, cold sores, fever blisters, right? And this can also be good for combining with GV16 for headaches that have a lot of like stiffness in the head, stiffness in the neck. Because again, they're sort of like at the same level, right? To expel the wind that's like stiffening up the head and the face. So that's CV. If you have any questions, I can hang out for a few minutes, or you can feel free to text me or even have a conversation over the phone or in some other, or the email. Okay. All right. Sorry for going over. I apologize. Thank you for your patience in going 4 minutes over. And I will post the recording wherever I can, either on Canvas if it lets me, it usually doesn't, or on my YouTube channel. Okay. Take care, everyone.
Anytime.